The Fujifilm X-T200 is the worst camera I've reviewed in quite some time, and I've been reviewing cameras online for over 20 years. I've been shooting Fujifilm products for 30 years, and I've been shooting for over 50 years. Why do I dislike this camera? Well, it's not a bad camera. There really are no bad cameras made today. The problem is that it is represented as a relatively low-cost, basic camera, which it is. It's a little bit less cost than some of the better cameras like the X-T30. However, it retains all the complexity and difficulty of use, which is going to make it very difficult for someone who doesn't shoot this camera every single day to get familiar with it enough to enjoy shooting with it. Here's the problem, among many. First off, Fujifilm's menu system is the worst in the industry, tied with Sony. But Fujifilm usually gets away with that because they have dedicated knobs with shutter speeds and apertures and so forth and exposure compensation. The problem is this camera doesn't. It has mystery navigation. It's got mystery buttons. This is the flash button. That's easy to figure out. But this knob, nobody knows what it does. This knob, nobody knows what it does. This knob, nobody knows what it does. So it's all a mystery. Oh, this button and this button? Oh, perfectly obvious what those do. No, it's not. And if you don't use this camera every single day, you're not going to know. I tried to use this camera, it drove me up the wall. Fujifilm's cameras usually drive me up the wall trying to set their menus, but once I do, they're easy to use and easy to turn on. This one not. This on-off button, something as simple as that is a pain. Okay, tap it once it goes on, and that's good. But the problem is that once it goes to sleep, well, you don't know when you pick up the camera if you tap this button if it's going to wake up or not. So then you pick it up, you tap this, doesn't come on quick enough, then you tap the on-off button again and realize, like, oh, it was on, now it just woke up and turned itself off, then you hit it again. As an inexpensive camera, it has a low-speed processor, so everything you do on this camera takes a little bit longer than I would like to have it happen. It's also got a lot of plastic on it compared to most of Fujifilm's cameras, and it's just not the camera that I could recommend to anyone because it's just not much fun to use. For the same price or less, you can go off and get a Sony a6100, which is a magnificent camera. For less money, you can get something like a Nikon D3500, which will take pictures at least as good and be much simpler and more fun to operate, and I think you'll get much more enjoyment out of the camera. To take a look at some of the pictures, here's a picture. I've never been a fan of the Fujifilm color system. It's great for people pictures, but awful, at least in my opinion, where I want really vivid colors for nature and landscape. And here, for instance, is the same shot on the Canon 90D. Each of these is set with the camera's color saturation set to its maximum, but here's the problem. This camera, for some reason, the X-T200, only goes to plus and minus 2 for sharpening and for color saturation, as opposed to all the other Fujifilm cameras that go to plus and minus 4. It seems that it doesn't have as large a range of adjustment. Maybe that's to try to keep the neophyte from doing something silly. But to be honest, I think this would be too frustrating for a basic user. I also think it would be too frustrating if you already own other Fujifilm cameras, as I do. This wouldn't make a good backup because everything's in the wrong place, which means if you suddenly have to pick up the camera and shoot it as a second camera, none of the buttons will make any sense. So, it's really sad, but some cameras got to be the worst camera I've tested. The other worst camera I ever tested was about 11 years ago. It was a Nikon D3000, which also had a very low-speed processor and just couldn't get things done quick enough. Now that I covered some of the basics, I wouldn't recommend this camera, so I don't want to spend too much time on it. What's new since the older model? Well, it has a new electronic viewfinder. It does 120p slow-motion video. It has internal stabilization for movies called a digital gimbal function. It uses supposedly electronic gyroscopes, exactly like an iPhone does. I haven't tried out to see how well it works. It didn't seem to work very well. It weighs a little less than the X-T100. It's got a new flip screen. If you like flip screens, I'm not a flip screen fan. It does this. It claims to have less rolling shutter effect. It claims to have better phase detection autofocus. And a nice thing about these cameras is they come in 3 colors. This is called dark silver. It also comes in champagne and in traditional silver. The problem is say the other Fujifilm cameras are made of real metal. This is not. This is plastic and it feels like plastic. It's not like the Canon AE1, which is a landmark, that they made it out of plastic, but they made it feel like metal. What's good about this camera is that it does have excellent high ISO performance. It's actually quite remarkable at the high ISOs. It also offers 4:3 and 16:9 ad-shot crops. It's good that this dial up here usually works as compensation. However, it's unmarked and free spinning, so good luck. It is a 4,000th of a second mechanical shutter and a 32,000th of a second electronic silent shutter. Some things that are bad is, honestly, My electronic viewfinder here is out of adjustment. It's actually tilted by about 1 degree. So if you look through the electronic finder and look at reality, you'll see the horizon is tilted a little bit. There's really no excuse for that. On the other hand, this camera is not made in Japan. It is made in Indonesia. So, too bad. It's really limited for video. Honestly, everybody gets excited about these interchangeable lens cameras for shooting video. I would never shoot the video on an interchangeable lens camera like this, but certainly not one of these Fujifilms. This is rated for only 15 minutes at 4K. My iPhone shoots way better than that. The problem people don't realize for most of these little cameras is autofocus never works well for video unless things aren't moving. In Hollywood, we shoot things entirely, and also even in your local television station, everything is shot with manual focus. And there's a guy there called a focus puller. Everything's rehearsed, everything exact, and that's how you get the focus pulling in and out perfectly. I've never seen an interchangeable lens camera that can do that. I'm shooting this video on my iPhone, which is your notice, focus close, focus far away. With this camera, you can't even get lenses that focus as close. I'm shooting this video from a distance of about 6 inches to get up close. Watch out, the default image cropping is 16:9. Because this is a 16:9 screen, you'll notice these black sides. And so to protect the innocent from complaining about the black screen here, by default, it's going to shoot in 16:9, which is the wrong shape. It does that to fill the screen out when you hit playback for beginners. But you do need to remember to go back in and set it to shoot the full frame of the camera, which is 3:2. There's no automatic brightness control for the rear LCD. There is no second card slot. There's no ability to save and recall camera settings to or from a card. There's no timed manual exposures longer than 30 seconds. You'll have to use bulb, remote release, and a timer instead. The buttons are not illuminated at night, which admittedly, still cameras don't do that. But the fact that my phones have done that ever since the 1990s, there's really no excuse for that in cameras. Here's a big thing that is missing. There's no focus mode lever. Beautiful thing about the Fujifilm cameras is they usually have right here a continuous, single, and manual focus lever adjuster. However, this camera doesn't. You've got to go into the menus, which, as I said, for a basic user, I would not get this camera from my mom. I got my mom a Sony a6000, which she loves. There's no Q button to get you the quick menu screen. Honestly, I've never really figured out how to get to most of the settings easily on this camera. There's no battery percentage display. One of the things you can't do on this, as opposed to most other Fujifilm cameras, is you usually can go to this screen here, and I have another video about that. You only get a battery icon. The buttons are flush, so you're not going to find them by feel very well. And again, they're not marked. The battery and card door has no spring on the lock. So you can open it and it springs open, but you can't just close it like this. You have to close it and slide that closed. The tripod socket's off center. So when you go to mount this on a tripod in the dark, you can't just put it by feel on your tripod. You've got to remember to go around here and good luck. Also, when you're on a tripod, you can't get your battery or your card out, which it seems I'm always trying to do that. Maybe because I'm in my studio, I want to go off to my workstation and see what the image looks like, but sorry, Charlie, it's too close. On the other hand, it's a small camera. Give them a break. There's only so many places they can put things. If you'd like to see the high ISO performance, I'll refer you to this link, which is also in my description. That'll take you to that section on my website and let you see in glorious detail and download the original files. The point is, it is really good. ISO 51000 looks about as good or better than a lot of similar cameras, or I should say a lot of even more expensive cameras. And that's about it. I'd recommend getting a Sony a6100 with the 16 to 50 millimeter power zoom lens, which is an even tinier lens, which is a magnificent little setup. It sells for the same price as this. Or I would certainly pay a little more and get a Fuji X-T200, which is a fantastic camera and skips a lot of the annoying parts about these controls and slow processor speeds and the other things I've been whining about on this camera. The X-T200 costs a little more, but you will thank me because this is the sort of camera they say the poor man pays twice. That means if you buy this thinking, oh, I'm going to get this for a few $100s less, it's going to drive you up the wall. And guess what? You're eventually going to buy a better camera anyway, so you just paid twice. So I would say pass on that. If you want to pay a little less, you can get the Nikon D3500. Or honestly, if you want to pay a little more too for an APS-C mirrorless camera, I'd get the Nikon D50 as well as the Sony. The Nikon D50 I think is a superb camera. Be sure to get that with its kit lens, the 16 to 50 millimeter collapsible zoom. But again, you can follow my links and look at that. Hey, I'm sorry I didn't love this camera like I usually love most cameras, but this camera just didn't do it for me. Thanks again for watching KenRockwell.com and KenRockwell.tv.